This is Dr. Miller again, and we're going to talk today about types or formats of photography. Photography, like any technology, really has a language, and I think it's really important that we understand what we're talking about when we're into photography. Some of it's a little more technical, but this exercise that we're going to do, your first assignment, is actually to get you familiar with different types of photographs that you might look at as well as the ones that you will take. So this first assignment, you actually won't even need your camera. We're going to have you collect some photographs, and we're going to use Flickr for that. Let's start by talking about the types of photography. There are several types that we will come back to in this class again and again. And these are the portrait, the landscape, candid, or you might call it documentary or even lifestyle photographs, close-up, action, and then finally a category which I'm just calling creative or perhaps artsy. So let's start with the portrait. Now a portrait is typically a photograph of a person, or a being anyway. And the thing that's a characteristic about a portrait that's really, really important is twofold. Number one, the subject, sometimes called the sitter, needs to be the dominant feature. And we can see in these four examples I have here, and one of them is a cat, that the dominant subject is entirely the individual, the sitter. Now the other characteristic, and this doesn't necessarily apply to the cat or pets or animals, but it certainly does for people. And that is that in a portrait, the person that is the subject knows that they are going to be the subject of the photograph. So with these, we can see obviously they know. Now the cat may know something's going on, but it's not quite the same for a pet. With the people, keep in mind two things: dominant, and that they know that they are posing for a photograph. Alright, the next category, and is a very broad category, landscape. And the landscape doesn't mean like we talk about with a document where you're going to print it, where it's horizontal landscape or vertical. In fact, landscape photographs can be verticals. But the characteristic of the landscape is that it's something that's out there. You're pointing your camera towards something. It may be nature, but it doesn't have to be nature. So here's a good example here of a landscape photograph. Here's another one. This one here is a cityscape, a skyline of Toronto. And this is man-made stuff, so it's not the same as being out in nature, but it is definitely a landscape photo. Alright, the category of candid, documentary, lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, these are photographs where if there are people in it, they don't appear to be posing for the camera. So for example, in this photo right here, there are definitely people in it, but they may not even be aware of the camera. It is possible to take a photograph that looks to be a candid, but is actually posed. For example, these two right here. Is this person with the bicycle standing there on purpose to create this shadow, or did the photographer just come upon it? Well, that's a good question, but it doesn't really matter because it makes a good photograph either way. Same with this. Now this is entirely possible that this was a candid of a kid in a Darth Vader suit walking along, and it's kind of dramatic. Again, bicycle. Was the bicycle there, or was the bicycle placed there to be a photo? It really doesn't matter. So these documentary, candid, lifestyle kind of things are very common. Close-up. A close-up doesn't mean closer, it means close up. And some of the students that take this class have a bit of a challenge because their camera may not have that much capacity to really get in there, but most cameras actually do. Here's the characteristic of the close-up. It's really close. So for example, in the head of this bird here, we can see that there's really nothing else. You don't know the context for where this is. Same with this woven pattern over here. Is this the chair or is it something else? It really doesn't matter because it makes an interesting photograph. And part of that is just these line texture elements of it. So it's very close. Here's another one. This is some items of jewelry that are positioned in a very interesting way, actually. Here's a close-up of a camera. You notice that the camera isn't centered. That's something we'll talk about when we talk about composition. Makes it a little more interesting. It's also even on an angle in this case. And here's another close-up. This is actually a reflection. So the reflected part isn't necessarily close-up. I mean, we can see there's a person back here. But the fact that it's this sink element that's reflecting the background, that's what the close-up element is. So close-up means close up. It doesn't mean just closer. It means close up. The subject really needs to fill the frame with a close-up. Action. An action is a pretty open term, but I think we know what we're talking about when we're documenting a sports event, for example. So here are some action shots. Now I shoot a lot of photographs of concerts and musicians, and so that's a really good action kind of item. This is a really dramatic photograph of some wolves snarling at each other. I can only assume that the photographer used a telephoto lens, but boy, talk about being at the right place at the right time. That's a really dramatic photograph. And that is definitely action. And here's your sports shot with a soccer game here. That's pretty simple. Action is got to be something pretty much moving. The more dramatic you can capture the specific moment, the better the photograph. And then we're going to allow you to kind of spread your wings a little bit, particularly when we get into the photo editing, and we will be doing some photo editing throughout much of the class, and we'll be using the tool called Pixlr, and it's a online editor. It's free, and that will be something that you're going to get good at. If you're already using Photoshop or some other form of editing software, that's fine. Just let me know what you're using. So with the arty kind of thing, there's really two things going. One is to just take an arty photograph. That's one thing. The other is to take a photograph and then to use the software to manipulate it. So this is a photograph of a drop, and it's taken with an extremely high-speed type camera. The creator of this replaced the drop image and the reflection of the drop image with a globe, with the Earth. So that makes a pretty interesting photograph right there. This is another one. This was just well thought out. There's really not a lot of manipulation going on here in terms of editing, but it's this background of what I assume are fingers that have been kind of doctored up in some fashion. I'm not really sure what that is that the beetle is sitting on, but it certainly makes a really interesting photograph. These two photographs are ones where they're heavily manipulated within the editing process. So with this one, we can see this kind of swirling mass here was created, and actually even the subject here, we can tell that there's been some manipulation to the clothing, and just this whole overall photograph has been really turned into something much more artistic in a sense by the software. Over here we have another thing. It started as a photograph, but it's really kind of making a statement by adding text and all these other manipulative factors. Again, an arty photograph or a fine arts photograph, if you like, doesn't have to have any manipulation to it at all. It just has to be a good idea. This is a photograph that I think is very interesting, and in part it's just because of the way that these elements of the shoes and the feet fill up the space. And that's something that's really important within composition. So I would consider this to be an artistic effort as much as the ones that have been manipulated. So let's talk a bit about the assignment. And in this assignment, I want you to go out and find examples of these different formats. So portrait, landscape, candid, close-up, action, and creative or arty are all going to be where you're going to find 2 photographs. You're going to look in Flickr for these photographs. And I've got a little process here for you to follow, but let me just go ahead and actually do it for you right away. So here we are. This is my Flickr. Again, you don't have to join Flickr. You can just go to Flickr and you go to the search box and you type in a word that you want to search by and enter that in there. So now we're just going to pull up a bunch of stuff that relates to Alabama. Now what I want you to do, by the way, you can look here, and we're just going to stay on everyone's photos, but if you had a friend that was on Flickr, you could look at their photos or you could look at your own. But let's look at this area right here, the licensing, because we don't want to be using people's photos without their permission. This is their intellectual property. So we're going to go to the Creative Commons only, and these are photographs that people have allowed the use of the photos. So if, for example, we want to say that this is the landscape photo that we want to use, and that's a very nice photo. So this definitely qualifies as a landscape photo. Now what you want to do is you're going to come down to this part right here and click on that. Okay, and it's going to give you this URL, and you're going to highlight that and copy it. By the way, if you look over here, you're going to find at least the title of this. So this is Marble Mill Falls, and I'm not really sure where that is in Alabama, but it looks pretty cool to me. And so I want you to capture this URL, and then I want you to create a document. So let's go back to our assignment page. And so again, I'm telling you where to click, how to collect that. You can create a document. Please use Microsoft Word or Google Docs, or you can use whatever you want and create a PDF. But that's what you're actually going to submit. And you're going to find the place to do that. It'll show up in a few days in the Assignment 1 folder, and it'll say Submit here, or Submit. So you want to find that, and you're going to submit your document to that. I want you to take these categories that we talked about. So for example, landscape, and I want you to write a description of it and then paste that in. So if we're going to use this one that we just captured, I think it was Marble Mill Falls, somewhere in Alabama, and then we're going to paste the URL that we just captured right here. Okay? Now I want you to write just a sentence about it and say this photo was interesting because of the way the water looks. Something like that. So that's a good example. The one that I have up here, right here, the Davy Crockett Moonshine Factory in Gatlinburg, has that title there, there's the URL, and this is why I selected it. So that's the assignment. Remember to pay attention to these descriptions I have in this document. It's going to be available for you to review, and that these formats that we're talking about, the portrait, the landscape, Candid, Closeup, Action, and Creative or Arty are going to be formats that you're going to be using throughout the class. Okay, I think you'll be doing just fine on this one. You don't have to use your camera, you don't have to get in the weather, but enjoy it.